the weirdest things about the first previews of the Spider-Man set that's coming out in September was the Green Goblin being a goblin. It's the thing I spoke the most about with Magic fans and comic book fans and friends of mine. Green Goblin Nemesis, the 4-mana 3/3 flyer, is a goblin human villain. Whenever you discard a non-land card, put a +1/+1 count on target goblin you control. Whenever you discard a land card, create a tap treasure token. Him being a goblin is absolutely bizarre to me for many reasons that I'm going to go into in this video. This is not to get angry or upset, but more to unpack and discuss the design choices that are made when it comes to adopting other universes into Magic. I've spoken before at multiple occasions on this channel that Magic is very good at engaging with other intellectual properties or universes and translating those things to Magic, whether that be mechanically, thematically, or some combination of the both. I'm not the biggest fan of this selection so far, but I'm still optimistic for the set being good. I'm a big Spider-Man and comic book fan, and just the mere sight of these has sent me into some sort of spiral hyperfixation. I've been reading comic books on Marvel Unlimited, and I've bought Spider-Man 2 on the PC to play as well. I'm super into it. I love it that Magic keeps doing this to me. I got into Doctor Who because of Magic. So in this video, I'm going to unpack why I think still that the Green Goblin should not be a goblin creature type, and what that means for the wider implications of how Magic is designed going forward. If you want to pick up any single or sealed product or pre-order anything from the Spider-Man set, well, these pre-orders aren't up, but other sets, you can do so from coolstuffinc.com. Use the code Kenobi at checkout to get 5% off your order, and it helps support the show. But if you're not in North America, you can do it in Europe at magicmadhouse.co.uk. Use the code on screen now to get 5% off your order and help support the show. They sell Magic, they sell Warhammer, they sell all sorts of card games. Norman Osborn is the Green Goblin. He is the arch nemesis of Spider-Man. He is the Joker to Spider-Man's Batman, if you will. I want to talk a bit more about Batman later on as well, because I think it's a really interesting parallel to the design space they went into with Green Goblin. For those of you who don't know Norman's background, he is a scientist and father to one of Peter Parker's childhood friends. Obviously, the details of this vary depending on comic book run and universe, but on the whole, a lot of this has some universal truths within Marvel storytelling. In essence, Norman Osborn is a mad scientist businessman wearing lots of Halloween-themed outfits and gear. I'll talk more about that in 1 second as well. Norman's abilities are that he's super strong and fast, in similar levels to Spider-Man, maybe a bit lower. He has a healing factor, and he's got a super intellect as well. All of these things were boosted by the experiments that he experimented on himself with the Goblin serum or other chemicals depending on the continuity. Norman Osborn's heightened abilities are in a way parallel to Spider-Man's. It is through the application of science that he's developed these abilities. Now, with Spider-Man, of course, he was bitten by a radioactive spider or genetically enhanced spider, normally at Oscorp, depending again on continuity, so it's a spider that was developed by Norman Osborn's company. That spider alters Spider-Man's DNA, his genetics, and gives him both the physical abilities of a spider, but also ties him into the grander spiritual, metaphysical web of spiderness. There's a whole thing in the Marvel comic books that I'm only just now getting involved with, which is different spider people from different timelines and dimensions, and the web of life and what's the word I'm looking for? Fate. The web of fate. There are gods, there are things that hunt spider people through dimensions. It's a whole thing. But it's really important to point out, because one of the things that people have said when I've got into these reads is that Spider-Man is a spider. Why isn't Green Goblin a goblin? That's because Spider-Man is quite literally genetically altered to be like a spider. When he mutates further in the animated show, he becomes Man Spider. When he de-evolves in one of the comic books in the Savage Lands, he becomes a man spider. When you de-evolve or whatever the Green Goblin, that's not quite what happens. He doesn't become a little goblin or a goblin generally. So the first point to this is that Spider-Man is quite explicitly and literally got spider DNA in him. The Green Goblin doesn't have goblin DNA because goblins don't really exist, at least in the main Spider-Man canon. In Marvel canon, by the way, there are a few different races of goblins. The one that I found the most information about are the goblins of, well, basically the Thor comic books. They're one of the races of the 10 realms, and they are goblins much in the same way that we see goblins in Magic. Here was quite literally the only image I could find of them on the internet from the Marvel wiki, because when you search Marvel and Goblin, strangely enough, you get a lot of goblin stuff, Green Goblin stuff. So first and foremost, the Green Goblin himself does not have the genetics of a Green Goblin or a goblin creature in the Marvel universe. That's never really been a thing. Now I thought, look, I like Spider-Man a lot, and I've read some Spider-Man comics. I'm now reading some some too. I'm currently reading Spectacular Spider-Man. But I thought perhaps I've just not seen some old reference where the Green Goblin is literally a goblin. But I actually really struggled to come across any versions of the Green Goblin where he was literally a goblin. And we're getting into it, by the way. Like, we're going to talk about why I think the decision was made to make him a goblin in Magic. But let's just unpack this a bit more. Alternative versions of Green Goblin that could kind of be a goblin. Noir Green Goblin appears to be sort of a twisted flipping of like what the Green Goblin normally is, which is a man in a mask. Instead, it's a goblin in a mask, if you will, although he's not a goblin. He's a man with scales that is like lizard-like, that was bullied as a child, and thus he wears a human mask to hide from that. The Red Goblin, who looks like a demonic Red Goblin, is actually Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin in the normal Marvel continuity, combined with Carnage, who is saving his life, or say saving his life, it's protecting him from having the Green Goblin serum pulled out of his body by nanites. It's a whole thing. Haven't read it yet, but I'm inclined to do so after doing all this research. Ultimate Green Goblin is the closest to being an actual goblin, but let's be honest, he looks like a fucking demon. When he has wings, he looks like a gargoyle in the animated show, and in the comic books, he's a giant horned monster that can fire fireballs from his hands. I guess he is the closest we get to being an actual goblin, because his body is altered to look a bit like a gargoyle / goblin. The Ultimate Green Goblin is the closest to it, but the 616 Goblin is not the Ultimate Green Goblin. His appearance and his goblin thing is a choice, an aesthetic choice, a gimmick, if you will, in much the same way that the vulture is not part bird. He is using a vulture motif, and in much the same way that if he was printed with the bird like subtype in Magic, I'd find that frustrating. The Rhino in most continuities wearing a suit is not a rhino. Dr. Octopus is another one of these. Dr. Ock, right? Octarius. He is not an octopus, literally. You might even do the motifs of multiple arms. He's an 8/8 similar. And weirdly, in the 1602 continuity, a different universe set in the 1602, the Green Goblin actually does, through scientific means, become this flying green creature thing, not in a suit or mask, which could be the closest we'll get to a goblin outside of the ultimate version of him. But also in that same comic books, Dr. Octopus becomes a octopus creature thing through scientific meddling. It's like a running motif in that series. And of course, when you're comparing it to Magic and how it will play with Magic, there is a very distinct thing that goblins are in Magic. Goblins in Magic do vary in how they look, from those of Kamigawa through to the Khan's blocks, through to the typical like little green man who's a little bit whimsical. Goblins take on quite a few shapes and sizes, but they all have these like ongoing things around mischief, comic relief, and sometimes that's subverted when we get a smart goblin or a violent, dangerous goblin, because it's kind of part of that, right? The mischief is there, but in spite of the mischief, they're still a formidable foe. And I'm not saying that Universes Beyond can't have different versions of goblins. If you have an orc from Lord of the Rings and an orc from Warhammer and two different Universes Beyond, they aren't going to look or act the same because they both have varying things going on. I completely get it. Even if their root is in some mythology, even Tolkien itself, right? I get that they'll be different. But the point I'm really laboring here is that the Green Goblin isn't a goblin even in his own universe. And that's why I think the type line goblin is strange. But the bit that bugs me even more is the fact that he plays well with goblins. He is a goblin human villain. That is his creature type. I do think that really this should be scientist. Hell, we've even got the meme itself of him in the Sam Raimi movie saying,
"You know, I'm something of a scientist myself."
Now, of course, Dr. Octavius is also a scientist in these cards as well, and a lot of these Spider-Man villains will be, but that's kind of just what happens in Spider-Man, that a lot of his villains are scientists. He is a scientist himself, and scientist exists as a creature type, as we saw in Doctor Who, and in Fallout, and in Jurassic Park. There might even be an argument that scientist is becoming way too common after just 3 different Universes Beyond things introduced approximately 15 different scientists to Magic. In a similar way to how Mark Rosewater said that they're going to move away from having so many, or move towards having less legendaries in the normal Magic sets, because Universes Beyond is often exclusively legendary creatures as they look to try and make cards for all the iconic and popular, unique characters within these worlds. But that argument could also be made for hero and villain for a lot of this stuff, and especially for human, right? Most of the franchises we're going to get engaged with are going to be human, and thus they're going to be a tired or heavily used creature type. So I don't really see why a scientist would be a problem. So I think he should be a scientist. But back to like I was saying, whenever you discard a non-land card, put a +1/+1 counter on target goblin you control. That obviously allows him to target himself because he is a goblin, but it allows him to play with this madness / discard fraying sanity style effect. Not literally fraying sanity, but I'm talking about the metaphorical fraying sanity of the Green Goblin. That's an important point. These super soldier-esque elements that the serums and chemicals and scientific experiments often give to the Green Goblins of the different Marvel universes and canons does make them go absolutely insane and have a split personality too. which I don't think we want to start calling that a goblin-esque trait, right? He's a goblin in metaphor only. But I think the reason he says on a target goblin here is a goblin payoff, well, there's two obvious reasons I can think of. The first of which I'm going to say is a bit tinfoil hat and a bit jaded, and I don't necessarily believe this is the case, but I think it plays well with other things in Magic, and thus makes it a desirable card to have for a red, black goblin commander deck, or even as a commander for a red, black disco goblin deck. It allows it to have a role and give it a function that makes it desirable, and thus something that people want to purchase or seek out or chase, in this case, buy a scene bundle. I don't think that's the case. The reason that I think it targets other goblins, and we'll probably get confirmation of this even when we see the set or from Wizards staff as they talk about these cards in future and the designs, is that I think it aims to play well with other Green Goblins or like the Hobgoblin. Harry Osborn, his son, takes over the mantle of the Hobgoblin, or even the Green Goblin quite literally in the original comic books, as a thing that happens in Spider-Man. Norman Osborn and Harry Osborn at different times are the Green Goblin or Hobgoblin or a form of Goblin, Red Goblin, whatever. Different goblins. In my search for trying to figure out if like the Green Goblin ever controlled an army of goblins, there is a list of different goblin lackey armies that they've had. This thing in superhero comics that's kind of archetypal of villains like the Joker, Two-Face, in this case Green Goblin, the Kingpin, that sort of thing, is that they normally have a gang, especially in the old school classic comic books, and those gangs are often themed around their stuff. So in the case of this, there's been the Goblinettes and the Goblin gangs, the Goblin Nation, the War Goblins, but as much as I can tell, all of them are wearing just Goblin costumes and around the theme. In the same way that when Fraser Crane, in the same way that Jonathan Crane, not Fraser Crane, I always get the two mixed up, but when Jonathan Crane is the Scarecrow in Batman and he has an entire gang dressing up as scarecrows to help him out, they aren't all literally scarecrows. That'd be very weird to creature type them as scarecrows in Magic. Although it does invite this really interesting conversation. That's why I wanted to make this video around what is the inherent nature of a thing in terms of we're getting philosophical here, not only in comic books and the acting and taking on of a role, but then how that equates to the game design and building of Magic. Let me expand that a little bit. What I'm saying is the Joker is going to be a clown whenever we get to DC or Batman, which I'm incredibly excited about, by the way. The clown Prince of Crime himself should be a villain, human clown villain, right? That should be what the Joker is. And his gang aren't always dressed as clowns, but a lot of them often are. And if you're dressed as a clown, would you not be able to be the creature type or job type, I guess, in the creature type line on Magic cards of clown? And thus, would that make Scarecrow's goons scarecrows if they're dressed like scarecrows? What is the fundamental or essentialist element of what makes a scarecrow? Is it being non-sentient? Because the scarecrows of Magic definitely are sentient and move around. In essence, I thought Green Goblin was the first example of a card being metaphorically what it is in its creature type line, because it's not a literal goblin, not in terms of what the goblins are within Marvel canon or within Spider-Man. It's very much a person dressing up as a gimmick. But then someone in my comments pointed out that actually constructs and robots work much in the same way. And I went digging. Some of them have constructors in their type line, but things like Jehovah's Time Bug, for example, just says insect. The Crowan Horse, if we're talking about things that pull from real world or other stories, but the Crowan Horse, which is the horse of Troy or whatever, this is literally a horse. Even though it's not a horse, it's literally a horse on the card, should I say. It's not literally a horse in the game. It's not a horse that's alive or biologically a horse. It is a wooden horse. It becomes this really interesting conversation about what makes up creature types in Magic. It's why I think Magic is such a good game, from color pie philosophy to these design questions. But I still hold that the Green Goblin should not be a goblin simply to allow him to engage with the Hobgoblin, other Goblin or Green Goblin archetypal characters from Spider-Man, and always gangs that are goblinified. And the example that I want to give to really drive that home is Batman. Of course, Batman is not a bat. If you didn't know, his powers are not brought from a bat. He adopts the moniker or the style or the aesthetics of a bat because there's something that he feared as a child, and he believed it'd help him to control and own that fear and strike that fear into the criminals of Gotham when he took up the mantle to become a vigilante. Now, the bat symbol itself has become this heroic thing in DC Comics, again, depending on main canon, resets, different lore and stuff. I know a lot more about Batman than I do Spider-Man. But the point is, there's an entire Bat family. The Robins, as there were, which are multiple of them and multiple of them acting at any one time, they are part of the Bat family too. The Bat family is Batman, it's Barbara Gordon, the Oracle, it's Jim Gordon, the leader of the Gotham police force. At times it's Catwoman, but if we really clear cut about it, it's his sidekicks. It's all of the Robins, it's Nightwing, it's Batgirl, it's Batwoman, it's the various Batgirls, sorry, it's the Huntress. They're all different DC characters, the Red Hood, Red Robin and similar. I'll stop naming DC characters now, but they're all part of what's called the Bat family. They have their own books that all have intertwined storylines, and the arcs often go between the books. It's literally a thing you can Google and you'll get huge, I'm probably showing them on screen right now, like huge pieces of art showing off the entire Bat family and various members of the Bat family all working together, standing together, or just posing together. And the point is, the Bat family should work together. There's this really interesting tension with Batman when you come to make Magic cards about him, that some of his storylines, I guess this is why you do different versions of different characters, right? Or different versions of the same character, should I say. Batman is often a loner in some fiction, to a fault. He doesn't trust the rest of the Justice League. He even plans ways to destroy them if they ever go rogue, because he's always got this eye of suspicion. But then he gets tempered. That idea gets tempered when he gets, in the classic comics, literal children who depend upon him and become Robin, acrobatic boy wards that support him. And then over time he builds the Bat family that unpacks and softens this grizzled war veteran of the of vigilantism to be less of a bloody loner. So when it comes to making a DC Comics set, or dare I say it, a Batman set, yes, we'll have loner Batman as a historical flashback perhaps, maybe one of the Commander decks, maybe one of the Spotlight series scene things, but ultimately the Bat family work together very tightly to protect Gotham and work to also expand and protect the world and join in with the Teen Titans and the Justice League and similar. What I'm getting at is, you don't make Batman and the members of the Bat family bats simply to allow them to interact with one another. Now, maybe this is more obvious with Batman himself, because Batman is a main character, and Green Goblin, although one of the main antagonists of Spider-Man himself, is not a main character, and thus maybe has some things they're more likely to do with him than they would do with a main character. But what this says to me is that they are going for a shorthand way of doing Goblins affecting Goblins, so they can do this archetype or combination of Goblin characters, even when they're not quite literally Goblins. We just call them Goblins because they dress like Goblins. And I simply put, just think this is a weak version of using the mechanics that Magic affords us to show that. I don't know exactly how I'd go about making the Green Goblin affect the Hobgoblin and other Goblin cards that come in the main set, because that's evidently something they're trying to do, but and I also appreciate that this is the easiest way to do that, perhaps a way of doing it without loading the cards up with tons of words or mechanical complexity and similar, but I just don't think it's a very fulfilling way of doing it, especially in the wider context of connecting to other IPs and to Magic itself in terms of what Goblins do or are. It's very strange that the Green Goblin would actually just be a good character in a Goblin deck when it's a man just dressed up as a Goblin. Although I guess that, again, like I said, what makes a Goblin? Is a man dressed up as a Goblin enough to warrant being in a Goblin-themed deck? In the same way that Batman and the Bat family would not be bats, it'd be really silly to say they are. I'm not saying this is laziness or bad per se. Okay, what I am saying is that I don't like it. That's probably a more accurate way of saying it. I don't like really straining the creature types of Magic to make this fit as a mechanical thing within the game. And this isn't the first time that the creature types have caused an issue with the Universes Beyond. It's actually like the third major issue I can think of. The first one was that they started making a lot of different creature types that they're going to struggle to reprint later and have to keyword a parallel within Magic that isn't copyrighted. I'm talking about the Astartes, the Tyranids, the Necrons, all these things that are like actual words they can't really use and reprint into Magic canon or universes within when they eventually want to reprint Warhammer cards, if they ever want to reprint Warhammer cards. Instead, they're going to have to make a parallel for them, and it sucks. And then we have Doctor Who, where we had cards that were referred to as the Doctor on the cards, or a Doctor on the cards, but that's not referring to the creature type Doctor. It's specifically referring to the combined creature type of Time Lord Doctor, which in itself becomes slightly confusing, not only because it's not inherent to the card itself, like Doctor's Companion says, you have two commanders if the other is the Doctor being a card with the in the name and Time Lord Doctor on the card, I guess. Like, the first question I had to ask was, is Missy not a Time Lord? Or, well, she's not the Doctor, I know that now that I've watched Doctor Who, but before watching Doctor Who, I thought she might have been a Doctor. I didn't really get it. And it just goes to show that I guess there are things in Magic that are strained when you do them. Power and toughness is the other one, right? But it's the one that we let go. I joked and semi-seriously talked about this when my video of the weekend came out about Spider-Man, that it bugs me that Doc Ock can like get group blocked by both Venom and Spider-Man and still win that fight, because it doesn't really make sense from a power scaling comic book fan perspective. I just think the power level and power scaling conversation is more clearly important when it comes to things like comic books, which is from a culture where this has been a regular conversation in the past. And for some balance, there are things they get very right with Universes Beyond that I love. A lot of the flavor designs of the Warhammer decks were incredible. The theming of Swords to Plowshare being a decommissioned Lehman Russell and aggro world was incredible, and using sagas to represent the narratives of episodes in Doctor Who is some real solid genius, I'd say, levels of design within Magic. We're seeing it also with the Guardian Forces being sagas in the new Final Fantasy stuff too. They get a lot of things right. It's just that this Goblin thing really wanted me to, I don't know, focus, meditate on it a bit. I also made a jokey video, not serious, but it's funny to think about how many children from Stranger Things can fight and kill Thalia, a trained paladin, one of the best trained paladins on the plane of Innistrad. But then you get things like the power scaling fits to like the mana cost. Like, are you looking at a weakened version of the character, a younger version of the character, a version of the character who's not quite up to their full power potential? A 7 mana Spider-Man is going to be a lot stronger and more powerful in a fist fight than a 3 mana Spider-Man, for example. The different snapshots in time, the different versions, different dimensions, different universes, all sorts of like rationale and arguments around that. But none of those arguments really fit for saying the Green Goblin is a goblin. Ultimately, they've just had to be really flexible to the point that they're doing something they've never done before that feels like it. I'm going to use the word betrays, but I don't mean it in a really serious, stark way. I'm not like, you've betrayed Magic, fuck you. But I think it betrays some of the neat and tidy design that we've had in Magic in the past. And that, plus understanding and liking comic books a lot, makes me feel just a bit like, ugh, when I see a Green Goblin who's a literal goblin. I guess we're going to see cracks. And we're going to see strained parts of the game as they go to try and make Magic fit as a rule system within the skin, the coat, or the flesh of another universe, world, canon, or intellectual property. And I think creature types is one of those bits where it becomes strained and it becomes obvious, and then I can make a nerdy video like this. But ultimately, even if I don't agree with a Green Goblin being a goblin, I think it's still interesting, right? It made me do some deep dive and some thinking around all this universe's beyond stuff and my favorite comics. And that's a good thing. I've been Vince, also known as PleasantKenobi on the internet. Let me know if you got this far into the video without telling me I'm clickbait, rage baiting or some shit. If you actually listened to the video and found it interesting and have some thoughts on the topic, let me know in the comment section below. If your thoughts are the Spider-Man set's shit, then that's not very productive or helpful. If you want to talk about the price, I agree with you already. It's too fucking expensive. Unless you're saying it's too cheap, in which case you're a fucking idiot. I've been Vince, also known as PleasantKenobi on the internet. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Oh, and subscribe to my Patreon. Link in the description below. Ta for now.